In the world of planar magnetic headphones, there are very few small manufacturers. At one point, you had to dream of buying from Audeze since they were the only company using planar drivers. Then came Hi-Fi Man, Monolith, and a few other brands from China. Avantone finally stepped into the field with their planar headphone last year. Audiophiles like to find rare products. After all, one of the joys of a hobby is to find things that are unique or in limited supply. In 2018, the Ukrainian company Verum Audio released their first planar magnetic headphone, which they called the Verum 1. Verum has altered some elements of the headphone and now sell a modified version of the Verum 1. This is a $350 headphone. It is hand-built by one person. A subscriber to my channel asked if I would review his Verum 1, and of course I said yes. I appreciate the opportunity to take this unique headphone for a spin. So, is the Verum 1 a headphone of any significance, or does it come with too much baggage? We should mention at the outset that Igor, the creator of Verum, has some issues that continue to plague him. There are several forum discussions about Igor's behavior online. I'm not going to talk about it. If you're interested, you can easily find the forums on Google. You will also need to decide whether the allegations are true, and if true, whether a person's beliefs will dissuade you from buying their products. In this video, I'm only interested in the product itself. Consequently, we will limit our discussion to the history of this company and the headphones. Regarding Verum, the company itself released its first and only product in 2018. It was, of course, the Verum 1 headphone. Verum makes headphones in limited quantities. As a one-man operation, the wait period sometimes can be a few months. The Verum website currently has updates about production status. Verum's tagline is that they are a, quote, small but ambitious headphone manufacturer. They believe that top performance in audio can be achieved at a moderate price. The Verum 1 is a unique-looking headphone. There's no mistaking it for anything else. The company says they use premium materials. They claim their driver has the biggest active area and are one of the most powerful magnetic systems in planar headphones. The company says they use titanium knobs, leather headband, sheepskin earpads, and fiberglass reinforced polymer ear cups. There are three types of Verum 1 headphones: Carbon, Zebrano, and Bubinga. All cost the same. The headband and yoke are metal. The ear cup faceplate is also machined metal. The ear cups on the headphones I have are wood. The ear pads are soft, spacious, and sit around my ears. The ear pads are attached with magnets. There is no way to attach third-party ear pads because of the shape of the headphones. You could theoretically cut the ear pads off their metal retainer and then attach another set of ear pads if you wanted to. The headband is fairly soft, but to be honest, it does not feel premium. The lack of headband padding is something people will notice immediately. The headband adjustment system is fairly odd. You have to unscrew the knobs on both sides, take the knobs off, pull the headband out, then shift the headband to a new position, then screw the knobs back on. The knobs keep the headband from shifting, but the headband structure itself retains the headband in a particular position. There are notches onto which the headband sits. The knob merely keeps the headband steady in place. Another odd design choice is the ear cup housing. Clearly, you can see the jutting cable inputs. When you take a close look at that area, you will notice there is a significant gap between the ear pads and the cable inputs. This is just empty space. A third odd decision is the headband structure. It is two pieces that are joined in the middle with a metal retainer. These two halves swivel at the middle. This is what gives the ear cups horizontal adjustment. This is fairly unique in a headband design, and it does tend to provide more freedom of movement than typically found on other headphones. The Verum 1 I got for review did not come with its stock cable. Consequently, I do not know if the cable that the Verum 1 comes with is something of concern. The cable I received from my subscriber is a hard audio cable, which are just fantastic. As for comfort, the Verum 1 is a bit on the lighter side of planar magnetic headphones. It is lighter than the Audeze LCD2, Avantone Planar, and Monolith M1570, but the Audeze LCD GX is a little lighter than the Verum 1. The ear pads are comfortable. The clamping force is moderate and does not cause fatigue or pain. My ears tend to get warm after about 2 hours, but I can wear these headphones for about 3 hours without much issue. The headband begins to cause a bit of discomfort about 1 hour into wearing them and will require some adjustment on the head from time to time. The lack of padding may be an issue for some people. Overall, the Verum 1 seems fairly well built, but some of the decisions with this headphone leave me less than enthusiastic. For example, the use of magnetic ear pads severely limits anyone from using third-party alternatives. You can tear off the stock ear pads from their metal backing and then try an alternative ear pad, but that's just a lot of work. I think it's a misstep to not use a padded headband. Large planar magnetic headphones should come with padded headbands, and Verum is not the only company that has refused to consider this comfort issue. The jutting cable inputs seems a bit unnecessary. As far as I can tell, it's all aesthetic and has nothing to do with driver design or structural integrity. The headband adjustment system is one of the most backward I have ever seen. This may not be an issue for some people, but it's simply too cumbersome. The notches on the headband are not numbered and there are no indicators, which means that you must have a keen eye and make sure your adjustments are exactly the same on both sides. It seems that Verum does use some premium components. The ear pads are surprisingly comfortable. The headband is leather, though they don't really look like it. The titanium knobs are nice, but totally unnecessary. Overall, while the Verum 1 seems to be sturdy and fairly comfortable, there are a number of weird decisions that don't make a whole lot of sense. Verum outright says that they don't want to talk about the sound signature of their headphones. Instead, they want people to watch honest reviews of our clients, according to them. Frankly, I'm not sure what that means. I suppose Verum might find positive reviews honest and negative reviews less than honest. Anyway, while I think it's refreshing to see a manufacturer not hype a product's performance, it's a little weird that Verum does not have a single thing to say about what their headphone is capable of. Since we essentially have a blank slate, we can approach the Verum 1 examination without preconceptions. To test the Verum 1, I used it with numerous devices. This included my Shitmodi 3 and Liquid Spark stack, which is neutral. I also paired the headphone with the RME 80i2 DAC and the Earman TR amp. I used the hard audio cable I got in the box and, obviously, the stock ear pads. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. Verum does not say how much power their headphone needs, but we know from experience that planar magnetic headphones do require more power than typical dynamic driver alternatives. I recommend around 250 milliwatts for large planar magnetic headphones, and that is the power I'm going to assume the Verum 1 needs as well. The Verum 1 has a rolled-off bass response with average clarity. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the Verum 1 did recreate the rumbling sound from the beginning of the track. However, that detail was rolled off and had quick transients. The rumble did not linger nor sound as full as it did on the neutral Allo Audio S4X. When the crescendo hit, the organ was just barely ahead of the other instruments. There was noticeable melding among all instruments, although the sounds were not muffled. I could hear distortion with the organ at higher volumes. In Conquered by Overwork, there's a rolling marble effect at the beginning of the song. This detail is supposed to pan from right to left to center. The Verum 1 did present the rolling marble sound, but it seemed a bit recessed. Moreover, the panning did not occur. There are multiple drums in this track, and the Verum 1 presented all of them, but they all melded together, one note after the other. The drum impact seemed a little blunted, as if there was a cotton sheet in front of the speaker absorbing some of the energy. I listened to several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. With each song, the Verum 1 rolled off the sub-bass. The subwoofer sounded like it was in another room, and its sound muffled through a wall. The drums were louder, but still sounded blunted, with some energy missing. The vocals were 2 steps ahead of the other instruments, and seemed to have their requisite sparkle. There's some hype among audiophiles regarding planar magnetic headphones having good bass. I always check for distortion, and my go-to test tracks for this are from the Sicario soundtrack. I tested the Verum 1 for distortion using those songs. There was audible, constant, and unmistakable sub-bass distortion at anything above moderate listening volumes. There was also melding between sub-bass and mid-bass reminiscent of dynamic driver performance. Overall, the Verum 1 suffers from the typical sub-bass roll-off found on every planar magnetic headphone I have heard. Some planar magnetic drivers have more, some less bass roll-off. I would say that the Verum 1 is about average among planar magnetic drivers in this regard. Bass clarity is not the usual planar style I have heard. There is noticeable melding between sub-bass and mid-bass similar to dynamic drivers. Most importantly, there is audible distortion with deep sub-bass, particularly at higher volumes. The Verum 1 has forward mids and accentuated vocals. In Ola Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed into the track. The Verum 1 presented both details but did emphasize them. The vocal grain was more audible than on the neutral Aventone planar. The sibilance was also noticeably greater than on the Aventone planar and also slightly more than on the Olo S4X. The guitar and drums appeared to have correct tonalities. There was some melding between these instruments. Orla's voice was 2 steps ahead of the instruments. The backup vocalist was not easy to separate from the primary vocalist, and their voices tended to combine into one. In Want You Back by Haim, the Verum 1 again accentuated sibilance. This was slightly more than the Olo S4X and considerably less than the HD560S. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The Verum 1 did present this detail, but it was a little recessed, somewhat muffled. The 2 backup vocalists initially were separated, one in the right and the other in the left ears. When the instruments played at maximum, however, all voices melded into one, and it was fairly difficult to differentiate among the 3 of them. The bass, guitar, drums, and piano all tended to meld their notes among each other, but they did seem to have correct timbre. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the Verum 1 accurately recreated the ukulele and drums. The bass, however, was recessed and seemed underemphasized. The primary male vocalist sibilance was well controlled and seemed close to neutral. His voice was smooth. There's a backup vocalist whose voice is layered underneath the primary vocalist. The Verum 1 could not separate those voices, and it came out as one. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breaths. The Verum 1 de-emphasized the sharpness of these breaths, and they sounded more like gasps. Overall, the Verum 1 has forward mids, particularly vocals. Female singers have accentuated vocal grain and sibilance. Male singers sound smoother. All instruments appear to have accurate timbre, but there was also noticeable melding among mid-centric instruments. The Verum 1 appears to have a treble emphasis, somewhere in the mid to high treble region. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the Verum 1 presented the brass and horns clearly. However, these instruments had more energy than on the neutral Aventone planar. The energy seemed a bit higher than what I heard on the Olo S4X as well. I could not hear individual instruments, but group sets were obvious. The Verum 1 did not present verticality or depth. Group sets did not seem further back or above or below. In Flight from the City, the Verum 1 made the piano sound like it was about 5 feet away. The bass notes were underemphasized, and each note melded with the next. The cello sounded smooth and also melded with the piano. There are pops and sizzles and electric buzzing effects in this track, and they're in the bottom layer. The Verum 1 struggled to clearly present these details. Sometimes I heard them, but they were a bit distant and muffled. Other times, when they should have been audible, they simply weren't. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the Verum 1 presented the piano in the right, the drums in the left, the saxophone center, and the bass recessed behind all of them. The saxophone seemed to have a bit more energy than on more neutral headphones, but it was not harsh or piercing. Some headphones are able to present varying tonalities of the cymbals as they are struck at different spots. The Verum 1, however, was not able to. Each cymbal strike sounded just like the one before. Moreover, the cymbal seemed a bit louder, more emphasized than on the Aventone planar or the S4X. This made the cymbal strike sound shoulder to shoulder with the saxophone. Overall, the Verum 1 has a treble push, but not one that is harsh or fatiguing. Treble clarity is about average at best. The treble emphasis sometimes makes cymbals sound louder than other instruments, which might be a little bit distracting to some people. If you have listened to this video from the beginning, then you probably have a fair idea about the Verum 1's detail abilities. They are average at best. The Verum 1 is simply not capable of rendering nuanced details. Given multiple opportunities to present layered sounds and complex tracks, the Verum 1 either muffled those details or did not present them at all. Sharp intakes of breath sometimes sound like gasps. Multiple vocalists might be separated, or if the instruments played too loudly, those vocalists' voices might meld into one. Perturbations in voices is not always audible. Separation of instruments is average at best, which results in some instrument details going unnoticed. Simpler tracks tend to do much better. When acoustic instruments are the primary focus of a song, the Verum 1 does indeed present small details. In Guy Clark's songs, for example, the Verum 1 showed the twang of guitar strings, the thumping sound when the guitar's body was hit, and the gruffness of Guy's voice. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps. The Focal Clear, 18 footsteps. The Austrian Audio Hi-X65, 16 to 17 footsteps. The Austrian Audio Hi-X55 presents 16 footsteps. The Hi-Fi Mansundara, Abentone Planar, and Beyerdynamic DT 1990 all present 10 to 11 footsteps. The audeze LCD2 Closed and LCD2 Classic each provide 7 to 8 footsteps. The Monolith M1070 and M1570 provide 8 to 9. And the older M1060C provides 7 footsteps. The audeze LCD1 and HD6XX from Sennheiser present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The Sifka P2 presents 10 to 11 footsteps. Now, with all of these headphones' performance in mind, how does the Verum 1 present? Well, the Verum 1 presented 6 footsteps. I listened to this song over and over again to make sure I had not made a mistake, but my findings were consistent and perfectly in line with my other listening tests. I use a spectrum to put detailed retrieval performance into context. On my scale, the Sennheiser HD6XX is the average performer with 6 to 7 footsteps rendition. The Verum 1's detailed retrieval is average at best. In truth, this headphone tends to muffle details in complex tracks, and it was rather difficult to hear about half the footsteps I mentioned. The Verum 1 is not remotely a detailed headphone. As with my detailed retrieval test, I have a spectrum of Soundstage I use to help put the Soundstage performance into context. In my view, the HD6XX has average Soundstage. From there, we move up and down the scale. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones ever have claustrophobic soundstage. The Neumann NDH20 and Audio-Technica M60X have below average soundstage. The audeze LCD1, LCD2 Closed, and the HD6XX have average soundstage. The Hi-Fi Mansundara, Abentone Planar, Allo Audio S4X, Austrian Audio Hi-X55 and X65, the LCD2 Classic, and the Monolith M1570 all have above average soundstage. The Hi-Fi Mandiva has wide soundstage. The Sennheiser HD800S has super wide soundstage. I would say that the Verum 1 has average to above average soundstage. It is a little wider than the HD6XX, but it is not to the same degree as the Sundara or the Abentone Planar. Moreover, the Verum 1 does not provide depth or verticality. You will not hear a 3D effect on this headphone. It is purely stereo. Verum Audio does not say what the sound signature of their headphone is supposed to be. As far as I know, Verum does not provide frequency response measurements for their headphone, so we don't even have a general idea. In my experience, it seems that the Verum 1 suffers from the same type of sub-bass roll-off that all planar magnetics I've heard have. Some other planars have a greater roll-off, and some might have a bit more bass, but the Verum 1 falls directly in the middle. Sub-bass and mid-bass tend to meld, a lot like typical dynamic driver headphones. While transients is faster than dynamic drivers, mostly, that transients does not result in clearer bass. Further, there is audible and annoying distortion in the sub-bass at high volumes when playing with very bassy tracks. Lower, moderate volumes do not suffer this distortion. The mids are forward. Female vocals have emphasized sibilance and grain. However, neither is harsh or piercing, but it is an obvious deviation from neutral. Instruments tend to meld, but they also have correct timbre. Treble is also emphasized, though not harsh or fatiguing. Brass and horns have more energy, but they are clear and not piercing. The treble does not sound airy. Instead, even treble instruments tend to meld, similar to what the mid-centric instruments do. Cymbals sometimes sounded as loud as key instruments in the mix, which might be a little distracting to some people. Detail retrieval and soundstage is average. The Verum 1 does not excel at detail and will tend to obscure subtle elements in a track. I would say that the Verum 1 has an emphasis for vocals and treble. Vocalists always stand out in a mix and do sound full. Treble is accentuated. The Verum 1 does seem to have a balanced sound signature leaning towards warm, which is, frankly, a catch-all category. I believe reviewers should take time to compare products as often as possible. That's the only way to put things into context. In this section, we will compare the Verum 1 against alternative options. I decided to compare the Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Avantone Planar, and the Sifka P2 against the Verum 1. While there are plenty of more expensive headphones to try, I decided to keep things within a similar price point as the Verum headphones. All headphones were used with their stock cables and ear pads. I plugged them into my passive AB switch, which itself was plugged into my RME 80i2 DAC. I tried to volume match to the best of my ability. I listened to my test playlist. The Sundara has a sub-bass response similar to that of the Verum 1. However, the Sundara had slightly faster transients. Mid-bass impact was also very similar, but the Verum 1 seemed to have a slightly more blunted effect, as if some of the drum energy was taken away. The Sundara, without doubt, has greater separation of sub-bass and mid-bass than the Verum 1, resulting in greater clarity in this region on the Sundara. Both the Verum 1 and Sundara have forward mids. However, the Sundara had less sibilance and vocal grain. Female vocalists were a bit smoother on the Sundara. There was greater separation of instruments in the mids region with the Sundara. The Verum 1 made vocals sound a bit more full, and instruments tended to meld with each other a bit more than they did on the Sundara. Timbre of instruments sounded the same. The Sundara has closer to neutral treble response than the Verum 1. There is a noticeable difference here. Instruments tend to have slightly greater separation and more air on the Sundara. The Verum 1 makes instruments appear closer to the ears. Neither headphone is harsh, even at high volumes. As for soundstage and detail, well, the Sundara has more of both. The P2's sub-bass is very similar to that of the Verum 1. However, I think the Verum 1 has slightly longer decay. Going back and forth, it was hard to say that one had more or less sub-bass presence. Mid-bass impact was a little sharper on the Verum 1, but separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was slightly greater on the P2. The P2 has forward mids. It emphasizes sibilance more than the Verum 1. In fact, the P2 sibilance push is a few decibels above what the Verum 1 does. Vocal grain is about the same on both. Both the P2 and Verum 1 appear to present the same or similar amount of melding among instruments. Neither was clearer than the other. Treble on the P2 is more neutral than the Verum 1. Both headphones clearly present treble-centric instruments. However, the Verum 1 does accentuate treble energy more, which may require listening to this headphone at lower volumes for some people. Clarity of treble instruments was about the same. Separation of instruments was similar, and I could not say one was different from the other in any meaningful way. The Verum 1 and P2 have very similar soundstage. The P2, however, provides more detail retrieval. The Avantone Planar has slightly greater sub-bass roll-off than the Verum 1. Transients is faster on the Planar as well. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass is more obvious on the Planar. Mid-bass impact is similar, but I think that the Verum 1 might have marginally less energy than the Planar. The Planar provides more clarity in the bass region overall. The mids are considerably more neutral on the Planar than on the Verum 1. While the Verum 1 emphasizes sibilance and vocal grain, the Planar keeps both details neutral. Even at high volumes, the Planar never becomes harsh or piercing. The timbre of instruments appeared to be the same on both headphones, but the Planar had more separation and clarity. Treble is more neutral on the Planar as well. Separation of treble instruments is greater on the Planar. While the Verum 1 accentuates cymbals, making them sound as loud as other elements in a mix, the Planar does not. The Planar has depth and verticality, the Verum 1 does not. The Planar has wider soundstage and greater detail retrieval. The bottom line is that all of these headphones have different sound signatures. They share some things in common. For example, all of them have a sub-bass roll-off, but not really to the same degree. All of them have at least average soundstage, but some are wider than others. Some of these headphones provide greater clarity and separation. There are a few things to point out. First, none of the competitor headphones had the sub-bass distortion the Verum 1 presented. Second, the Verum 1 was the only headphone that accentuated cymbals and made them sound at least as loud as principal instruments in a mix. If sibilance is an issue for you, then the P2 and Verum 1 should be avoided. If you want wide soundstage and clarity, then the Sundara and Planar are good options. If you want a warmer sound signature, then the P2 and Verum 1 are equally adept. As always, you may like one of these headphones, hate them all, or be utterly indifferent. I like to talk about the overall experience with a company whenever possible. It is rare to find a manufacturer that is actually dedicated to its customers and products. Companies are happy to take your money, but usually give you the runaround when it comes to the after-sales customer support. As a one-man operation, Verum Audio needs to provide customer service that is above and beyond the type offered by its bigger rivals. I looked at Verum Audio's warranty. I think if you're interested in buying this headphone, then you seriously should consider what Verum Audio says in their warranty policy. Initially, Verum's warranty might seem fairly respectable. After all, they provide a 2-year warranty for the headphone. The headband and earpads, however, get a 1-year warranty. The problem is that Verum's warranty page says absolutely nothing about what is covered under its vague warranty. One assumes that driver failure is covered, but there is no indication whatsoever if there are things a user should not do so that the headphones remain under warranty. For example, some companies clearly state the maximum power input for their headphones. Exceeding that power might damage the drivers and would not be within normal working conditions, and the company will not warranty it. Consequently, if you kill your headphone drivers because you took some clown's suggestion to use a stereo amplifier for your headphones, the resulting damage is not covered by warranty. Similarly, audeze hides the fact that their drivers are easily damaged when there is a sudden pressure change. They do provide this warning, and you're supposed to read the FAQ where it's found. Should you damage the audeze drivers because you pressed on the ear cups, the warranty will not cover the damage. But Verum Audio has no such warnings. Hell, Verum doesn't even say what the maximum power input is. They don't tell you what is considered user error. They don't even mention if there's a manual or FAQ you should read to make sure you understand the normal working parameters of their headphone. I searched for a manual for the Verum 1, by the way, and I couldn't find it. Verum Audio says that any warranty service is provided in Ukraine. You, the customer, are responsible for shipping the headphone to Ukraine. This is before you know whether or not the issue with the headphone is covered under Verum's amorphous warranty. If the defect is covered, then Verum will pay for the return shipping. If the defect is not covered, then you need to pay for return shipping. And depending on where you live, the cost of shipping could easily be half the price of the headphone before the cost of having an out-of-warranty headphone repaired. Verum Audio has a doozy of a clause in their warranty statement. They say that if you receive a headphone with a physical defect, you have up to 1 week after delivery to file a claim. If you do not inform Verum within this period, then the defect will not be covered. This begs the following questions. On day 8, if you notice and tell Verum that the wood housing is starting to peel or crack, is that considered out of warranty? If there are bubbles under the wood varnish, as in the case of the headphone I was sent, but you don't realize it until 8 days after delivery, is Verum going to fix the problem? Now, these examples might be in regards to manufacturer defects and not necessarily shipping defects. Maybe this damage was not the result of poor packaging and shipping. Or maybe it was, you have no idea. The problem is that Verum Audio does not say what is considered physical damage upon arrival. And I have one final nail in the coffin: the restocking fee. Verum Audio charges a 50% restocking fee if you return the headphones after trying but not liking them. Although Verum does not say, I assume you would be responsible for return shipping as well. This 50% restocking fee is the highest I have seen so far. I don't know of any other company that charges this exorbitant amount. Look, if you're willing to take a plunge on a small company and are prepared to hope that the one-man operation will fully support a product, then that's your decision. But I simply see no excuse whatsoever for Verum Audio's awful warranty. It is hands down the second most vague I have seen, second only to Monolith's. But even Monolith does not charge a 50% restocking fee for merely returning a product after you tried it. Verum's warranty is not a warranty. It's an ambiguous warning that you, the consumer, are on the hook. No matter what, you will have to pay. If the defect is covered under warranty, you'll pay for shipping to Verum. If the defect is not covered under warranty, then you'll pay for everything. And if you don't tell Verum within 7 days of delivery that the headphones arrived with some damage, you don't get warranty support for that damage. Simply amazing stuff. This takes some really bloated cojones. There are a lot of good headphones in the market. It was not always the case. Maybe 15 to 20 years ago, you'd have to hunt for headphones that didn't break when you touched them, or didn't sound like needles stabbing your ears. Or you would have to skimp and save to buy expensive headphones. But for at least 10 years, there have been changes. I do not promote buying more and more expensive gear. From my experience, paying more for something does not get you better performance. I understand if people like a particular sound signature and are willing to pay for it. But you can say that about anything in life. If you really covet something, you'll find a way to get it, no matter the cost. It's good to see cheaper planar magnetic headphones. I like knowing that companies such as Audeze have to seriously consider their position. Audeze has not, at least not yet, but the more options they have to contend with, the better. The Verum One is one among many alternatives to Audeze. The fact that it is made by one person is particularly noteworthy. I applaud people trying to shake up the market. The Verum headphone is an interesting one-man product. It does nothing different from other headphones except for styling. Despite its hand-built heritage, the Verum One has no real standout features or selling points, things that should compel people to forget the alternatives. This brings us to value. No, I do not think that the Verum One is value at $350. In fact, I do not think it is value at all at any price. There have only been a handful of times when I've told people not to buy a product. The DT1770, Audeze Mobius, and the FIO BTR5 are the only products I can think of right now that I told people not to buy. But the Verum One is now the fourth product on this list of failures. The DT1770 failed because of its incredibly harsh signature and uncomfortable design. The Mobius failed because of its gimmick features and overpriced performance. The BTR5 failed because its app was utter garbage, cheaper alternatives to the BTR5 did what it purported to do, and because hype was the only reason that product was being propelled. And the Verum One fails for a number of reasons, which we will talk about. First, the overall design. This has nothing to do with aesthetics. This has everything to do with poor thinking. When I looked closely at the wood housing, I saw blemishes that were not caused by the original owner. There are 2 spots of wear, which I do think are user-induced, but I also noticed bubbles under the wood veneer and peeling of the wood near a screw, neither of which is a user-induced defect. The headband design is one of the worst I have ever seen. You are forced to unscrew both sides of the headband to adjust it. There are no indications to help you set the headband evenly on both sides. And, to put icing on the cake, the Verum One does not have a padded headband. The horizontal movement of the headband is pretty odd. I've never seen this before. It doesn't make sense. You don't need that much movement for a contoured fit, but the Verum One seems to go overboard. More importantly, the 2 halves of the headband structure are kept together by one screw, the same screw which permits swiveling. Over time, this will get loose. Then there's the small issue of the open space between the earpads and the cable input. I have no idea why this area exists other than for aesthetics. It's a minor complaint, I admit, but one which gives some insight into the multitude of odd design decisions for this headphone. I do not promote my own preferred sound signature. Others reviewers do it, but I refuse. What I like to hear is totally irrelevant. But there are more objective things about performance that do matter. One of those is distortion. I cannot stand bass distortion. It is a telltale sign of a headphone badly tuned. I put all of my headphones through the same stress test, and rarely do I find a headphone that distorts in sub-bass. The Verum one absolutely does. That distortion is patently obvious at above normal volumes, and it should not be audible at all. Then we come to the issue of Verum Audio's so-called warranty. I just cannot condone a product that lacks customer support. This warranty is shockingly anti-consumer. Maybe someone will say that Verum Audio perfectly addressed a defect in their headphones. If that's the case, then good. But clearly, Verum Audio will utilize its own whims to decide what is and is not in warranty. Catch the guy at Verum on a bad day and you may find yourself out of money and a headphone that he says is out of warranty. And without a written guarantee about what is and is not actually covered, you cannot debate the issue. The Verum one's sound signature might be very pleasing to some people. Other than the bass distortion, the Verum one has average performance. It has its particular sound and not everybody is going to be into it, but that's a personal preference thing. What I will emphasize is that the Verum one does nothing better than headphones that cost about the same price. The Verum one provides mediocre detail retrieval and clarity. It has average to slightly above average soundstage. Its comfort is on par with other large planar magnetic headphones. Its build quality is, to be honest, not really reassuring. So when I take a grand view of the Verum one, I'm left with one conclusion. The Verum one feels like a beta headphone, not a finished product. I understand a small one-man company will have some issues with quality control. Hell, Hi-Fi Man has quality control problems all the time. But as a one-man operation, you would think this company would spend a lot more time carefully thinking about every decision. If only the build was less finicky, and if only the warranty was a real warranty, and not a blanket indulgence to absolve Verum Audio of responsibility. Ultimately, Verum Audio made its decisions. Despite the praise this headphone has received from others, I will caution people from buying it. Maybe version 3 will address the build issues, and maybe Verum Audio will provide a true warranty. Until then, you have plenty of alternatives. If you're in the market for a headphone, seriously consider other options before you choose to buy the Verum one.